Well, hello everyone. This is once again is Steve Salzberg, and I don't want my Outlook to be visible to all, so I'll delete that. This is the fourth in a series of open educational resources webinars that SoftChalk has put together, along with about 8 different organizations that deal with learning object repositories and open educational resources, both in terms of the object repositories and authoring tools, etc. So it's been a really interesting, fun time, actually. This is the fourth. We've done one a month, and they are all available as a recorded and archived, so I welcome you to come and pay some attention to those if you missed any of those. So I'm just going to get started here and talk a little bit about what we're doing. These will be the presenters, Cable Green, Director of Global Learning and Creative Commons, Paul Stacy, the Director of Communications, and another longer title he can tell you about at BC Campus, and James Glapa-Grothklog, who is the Dean of Educational Technology, and again, a much larger title for the College of the Canyons. I'm Steve Salzberg. I'm your host, and the interviewer, the moderator, is going to be Mitchell Levy, and he'll talk to you just in a few moments. But let me just make sure that we get the details down, and then we're going to restart very quickly the major part of this conversation. As I mentioned to you before, we are not going to have your voices heard because we have so many people and so much background noise. We generally do not allow people or enable people to be speaking all at the same time, baby crying, the sirens going on. But we do have a question box, a Q&A box. And this Q&A box is the way that we would invite you to really talk with us. You notice that there's this minimize panel button here. If it's in the way of the presentation, you can click it, and then it'll spin off to the right of your screen, and then you click it again, and it'll come back. There's this thing to turn voices on and off, but since I'm managing that, it's not really going to do the kind of thing that you would want it to do. And this is where you put your comments, and we will be responding to them here, or I will be managing the question area and be interrupting the speakers as appropriate with the questions that you create. Okay, so at this point, I'm simply going to say we are now beginning. Oh, one thing I need to mention is we do have a Twitter hashtag. So we have a member of our staff, Brittany, who is monitoring our Twitter. So we welcome you to engage in conversation around that as well. And having said all this, it is time to get formally started. And Mitchell, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. Let me hit the show my screen. So as Steve mentioned, this is our fourth OER session, the one on probably the one that's most entertaining. It's funding OER sustainability. And I have to thank James for the benefit of giving us a pumpkin theme. This is what Steven looks like, and I don't know if that means he has his Halloween costume on or not, but he is, and SoftChalk has been great at hosting and pulling together four, really fabulous sessions that are worth looking at. This is myself, and I did want to mention that, so I run the marketing chair for College Open Textbooks, so that's collegeopentextbooks.com. We have a Ning site, so that's collegeopentextbooks.ning.com, and we just reached our 1,000th member, and we actually wanted to thank Tahima Morshed for being the 1,000th member, who will get a special prize delivered from us. And after this talk, we are going to have a chat. So if you're interested in chatting more about either the concepts you hear today or anything else in the open textbook or OER world, go to collegeopentextbooks.ning.com, and you'll see the references to the chat area. So these are the photos of our panelists today. Paul Stacy, Director of BC Campus, Cable Green, Director of Global Learning, Creative Commons, and James Glapa-Grothklog. And James, I think we both sort of killed your name. I hope we did it. When you get to talk, why don't you try it at least once? But he's got a super long title: Dean, Educational Technology, Learning Resources, and Distance Learning at College of the Canyons. What I wanted to make sure is this material will be available, and will be available by a CC BY license, so anyone can take the content you see here and do with it what you wish. And what you'll get, just so you know, is we basically have 5 questions. So what I want to do is start with the first one. How do OER projects and programs get started? So why don't we get rolling? And Paul, I think if you want to start with answering this one, that would be great.
Sure. Well, welcome everybody. This is Paul Stacey from Vancouver, Canada. Great to be part of this Halloween special. Well, I think it's a good question, and in some ways it's perhaps important to start out saying that in some ways OER don't need funding at all to get started and could be implemented simply by institutions and individuals choosing to license things openly using a Creative Commons license. But if we advance to the next slide, Mitchell, there's generally been 2 sources of funding for OER. One really is foundation funding from grants, philanthropists like Hewlett, Mellon, and Gates, and you can see examples, snapshots of projects that they have funded, and their strategic goals are usually around things like advancing education around the world, or making and equalizing access to knowledge for teachers and students around the globe through open educational resources. And the foundations really have been, in my view, the granddaddy funders of open educational resource initiatives. And I think part of the challenge that we're facing now around that is that, of course, foundation grants are not usually long-term, nor are they intended to support ongoing operations. And so the second source of funding, and some of which has happened in parallel to foundation grants, are public government funds. And I've put up 3 examples of publicly funded open educational resource initiatives. The one that I've been directly involved with at BC Campus in Canada. And of course, we've got the TACT program underway in the United States right now. But even in the UK, there's been the JISC and JORM initiative that's been underway for about 3 years. And this source of funding, of course, is coming from government. And I find it interesting to look at the strategic goals of public-funded OER initiatives, which tend to be somewhat more focused and slightly different than the goals for foundation-funded initiatives. But in general, those have been the 2 sources of funds for open educational resources.
So just before we're going to have a little more time with Cable and James, but first, James, can you pronounce your last name properly? Would you mind?
Hi, everybody. This is James Glapa-Grossklag. You guys did a great job, but I'll comfort you with the fact that in my work life, everybody just refers to me as James GG.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, when I was teaching, it was Professor GG, so that's just fine. No harm, no foul.
All right, great. Well, thanks. So did James or Cable, did you want to add to these 2? I know we've got a couple other slides coming up, but anything new on the 2 sources of funding OER?
I can. This is James. I can wait for my slides. That's fine. I know Cable has plenty to add about the Department of Labor.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So let's talk about the publicly funded OER strategic goals.
Well, so I'll jump in here, but I'm sure Cable's got a lot to say about this too. If I take the 3 case studies or 3 examples of publicly funded OER that I've proposed, the top one there lists 3 strategic goals associated with the BC Campus OER initiative, which has been entirely funded by the Ministry of Advanced Education in British Columbia. And there really are 3 goals around what they're strategically trying to do. One is they're looking to form consortia and partnerships among public post-secondary institutions, primarily for the development of online learning curricula. that increases access for students all across the province and provides them with more opportunities for credentials, whether that be certificates, diplomas, or full degrees. The third kind of strategy or goal that they're trying to enable is to see some efficiencies around sharing and reuse of curricula so that we don't get many reinventions of the wheel across all public post-secondary institutions. And of course, we can compare those strategic goals, which are happening up in British Columbia, with what's happening here in the U.S., where the TAC program is very specific in terms of what its goals are, which are primarily targeting low-skilled and other workers that have been impacted by trade agreements, and are looking to provide funds to higher education institutions to improve retention and achievement rates for those workers as they pursue programs that meet industry needs. And interestingly, another strategic goal that TACT has is to strengthen the online and technology-enabled learning, and all the resources that are developed through that program must be openly licensed. And the JISC program in the UK is slightly different. They've been focused on sharing and reusing learning resources just across the board in all fields of study. And their primary aim is to really get a reputational benefit for the UK higher education system through making those resources visible and available worldwide.
Got it. Nice. Hey, Cable, we haven't heard from you yet, and I think you had mentioned that you might be muted out. So, Cable, you want to try talking so we can hear you? He's talking now. Hey, Steve, is there anything you could do for Cable to try to bring him? It's great to have some of the luminaries in the world online, but if everyone can't hear, that's not such a great thing.
Now,
Cable's haunted. Oh no.
let me suggest that he is still connected, and I wonder if he has a mute button on his personal phone that he is hit, because that's what I do all the time. Because it looks from.
This is James. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, James.
Great. Hi. Well, while you guys are figuring out the technical challenge for Cable, I will chime in here on this slide. One of the remarkable things and really historic aspects of the Department of Labor Trade Adjustment Act grant program, which, by the way, is $500 million a year over 4 years for a total of $2 billion in U.S. federal funding going towards community college work, is that all of the content produced with that has to be Creative Commons by licensed. It's really remarkable and, again, historic that you find the language that's up here on this slide in the RFP. As a condition of the receipt of the funding, the grantee has to license the work to the public. This is public funds. These are public funds, and what the federal government is saying is that if you're using public funds to produce work, that has to be available to the public. It's our money, it's our taxpayer money going to produce that work, so it should be available and available to be used by everyone for everyone's benefit.
Well said, James. This is Cable. Can you hear me now?
Thank you, Cable. I'm channeling Cable there.
Thank you. No, you were doing a great job. Everybody thought I was muted. I was just pretending I wanted James to talk. No, good. So right on the money. I wanted to make one comment a couple slides ago when Paul was speaking about different funding sources. I think he's absolutely right. We started with foundations, and now governments are getting involved. And there was a case this morning that was a nice mix of the two. So the Open Course Library, which Washington State's been building, actually launched its first 42 courses this morning. And it's a mix of Gates money, and then what the Washington State Legislature did was they matched those funds. And so each threw in $750,000, and the net result was building an entire core curriculum under a CC BY license. So we're seeing new models come out, and I'll talk about what I think about sustainability later. The only thing I'd add to the tax grant, and thank you, James, for covering, you did a great job. As James said, this is really a landmark statement by a government. And with exactly what James said, when public funds are used, the public that were the taxpayers should have free an open license to use those materials. And this is a very important point. If you think about walking up to somebody on the street and you say, by the way, you're a U.S. taxpayer, do you think that you should have access to the data and the journal articles that come out of the cancer research that the NIH just funded? Most people would say, well, yeah. And if, or any other public works. And that just makes sense, right? When we buy something, we should get access to it. And the reason that this Department of Labor grant is so important, especially for other U.S. agencies, is that it sets a precedent. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the threats from existing business models that are threatening that precedent, but I won't get ahead of us. Back to you.
And just to jump in, I think it is interesting to note that in some ways, the adoption of an open license like CC BY, it really doesn't require any funding. I mean, the TACT program might have been, funding allocated for trade adjustment workers just normally, but adding the open license requirement really doesn't require any funding. It's more of a policy level decision that, in fact, is potentially groundbreaking, as you point out.
That's exactly right. And Paul said it well, right? Open educational practice. I mean, good practice is just to say, look, I'm in the academy. I'm going to share what I build, right? That's what we do as teachers. But the reason that open policies are so incredibly important is that most people don't know about open. Most people don't know about Creative Commons licenses. And if you are taking public money, doesn't matter what country in the world you're in, there's an obligation there to give back the works that you've created with those public funds, because it's not your money. It was public money, and the public that paid for it should have access. And so to the extent that we need reminders, grantees need reminders of, oh yeah, I'm supposed to share this stuff. That's why a policy like this one on the screen here is so important.
No, which really, I'm sorry, let me just grab back. I wanted to make a point because you said the word practice, right? So what's interesting is, some of the top open education or research participants in the world were putting together this presentation. And it wasn't until we pulled it all together that we actually said, oh, should we put a CC BY license on here? And so it's this, so it's really fascinating. It's not always the first thing you think about when you're pulling content together, and it is something that we need to start actually practicing to do, because it just increases the breadth of content and the wealth of knowledge that's out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead, James.
We knew this was going to happen, didn't we?
No, this is great. I love it. So let's keep...
Okay, this is James, and I just wanted to provide a very local context, a very local example of what we're all talking about here. Cable's idea of walking up to a taxpayer on the street and saying, hey, do you think you should have to pay for what your taxpayer dollars have funded? Just this morning, I was having conversations here at my college about one more round of budget cuts to our library. I supervise our library. And, gee, we're down to the question of, gee, do we cut our subscription to the American Historical Association Journal or to Science Journal or to Nature? Because we're a publicly funded institution. We don't have enough money we don't receive enough money from the state to continue purchasing all of those journals. Well, how many articles in those journals are produced with scholarship stipends and fellowships provided by the taxpayers, and how many of those journals are produced at institutions that are supported by the taxpayers? I'd hazard a guess to say the majority of them. And here we are having to pay to buy them back so that our students can read them.
And Jane, just before you get into what's happening specifically at College of the Canyons around OER, I think it's worth noting that there's a tremendous discussion going on right now led by UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning, looking at OER guidelines for government. And anyone that's in a public sector government position that's part of today's webinar, I really encourage you to check those out. Those are some excellent guidelines that you could adopt to counter this traditional process of closing resources from public access.
Perfect. Hey, James, could you talk about, from the College of the Canyons perspective, how did you get started with your OER initiatives?
Sure, great. Yeah, and this is really very much a sort of a frontline sort of perspective. First of all, let me share. We're a California community college. We're a comprehensive community college. We serve about 25,000 students a year. About 4,000 students of those are online. That's the equivalent of about 15,000 full-time equivalent students every year. And many of our students work. Most of them are reentry students. Our average age of a student here is 30 years old. They're balancing jobs and kids in school, and textbook costs are a big deal. That's real. It's the difference between a student working just one job or working two jobs. And if you add that second job to cover the textbook costs, you don't have much time left for the student to actually devote to homework and studying. So it's a big deal here. Well, we're very fortunate that in our context, we have been introduced to the concept of OER from our executive leadership from the very top. Our Chancellor, Dr. Diane Van Hook, back in 2005 asked me to organize a group of faculty to go with her to visit the Foothill de Anza Community College District, which was where Dr. Martha Cantor of the U.S. Department of Education was chancellor at the time. And my boss, Dr. Van Hook, asked us to go up and take a look at the OER project that they were talking about, and to find out what the big deal was. And we returned from that trip, and most importantly, our chancellor returned from that trip convinced that OER would be a way to lower textbook costs for students, thereby increasing access to education, and a way to support faculty innovation, thereby improving teaching. And from there, College of the Canyons went on to be the first college to join the Community College Consortium for Open Educational Resources, which was developed under the leadership of Dr. Cantor and Judy Baker there at Foothill College, and we've supported their efforts over the years. And also, thanks to our chancellor's personal and passionate belief in the potential of open educational resources, we were able to institute a repository for OER on our campus so that we had a vehicle through which to promote faculty adoption and faculty production of content, open content. We happen to use Equella as our content management system. We're very pleased with Equella, and one of the neat features about Equella is that it offers a federated search so that content that's housed in BC Campus's repository, which is also, I believe, Paul, powered by Equella, then we can federate a search, and your content can come up in our repository and vice versa. But the key that I'd like to drive home is the support from the top of the institution. Not all institutions are able to launch their OER projects from the top, but it certainly has been extremely beneficial in our situation, so that the concept of openness as a way of promoting student access is directly connected to our mission, and that's been enunciated from the top of the institution.
So I guess that leads to the next question, and it's really, and this leads, it's similar to some of the questions that we get from the folks online. So once you get the initial support, how do you get the support from the rest of the organization? How do you drive this type of success?
Well, I have to say it's pretty easy at an institution, at a community college whose institutional mission is access. Remember, a community college is an open access institution. It's not a selective admissions institution. So it's easy to fit that within the larger context, but certainly it's something new. It's a new idea. You still have faculty members who think that they're going to make $1 million off that manuscript that they have in their drawer and that they've had in their drawer for the past 20 years. So you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time working on those folks, but the kinds of arguments that Cable was making earlier and the kinds of connections that Paul was making earlier between the practice of openness and the policy of openness and improved learning and improved access have been very instrumental, I think, very effective at our institution in making the case for people to practice openness and to share their content. And it's been very helpful as well to connect the idea of open content to the idea of improved teaching and learning. We know that the #1 reason students who have registered 4 classes one semester fail to return the next semester is the high cost of textbooks. We also know that about 50 to 60% of our students in any given semester are not able to buy textbooks. They're not able to afford textbooks, so they don't have textbooks. So if you approach faculty members who care passionately about their student success with that kind of information, say, hey, if you move to open source material or open material, you're going to be able to have students who have the content in their hands. They're going to perform better in class. They're going to be more highly motivated. They're going to respond better to your teaching, and they're going to be more likely to succeed. That's an argument that a lot of the faculty can easily respond to. At the same time, you've got the whole institutional context beyond the faculty. You've got your IT folks who have to have a lot to learn, I have to say, about Creative Commons, have a lot to learn about the concept of sharing. You know, in I think many cases, IT folks are their approach to institutional network management is protection and safeguarding against all the awful viruses and so on from outside. So they're not completely dialed into the concept of openness, and there's a lot of education to go on there. At the same time, you have campus stores or bookstores. Some institutions have in-house stores. We at College of the Canyons, we happen to have a third-party vendor, Barnes & Noble, that operates our campus store. They're terrific partners. We like having a place where we can buy T-shirts. We like having a business partner who sends back a part of their bottom line to our bottom line. That's good business for everybody. So we want to also find a solution that includes our campus bookstore in the distribution of OER. We don't want them to be out of the game. We want to find a way to keep them in the game.
That's a
there's
great
a question that came up, James, during your comments, is there a good place to find these statistics? You threw out a lot of numbers. Are they readily available?
Yeah, the student PIRGs, Student Public Interest Research Groups, under the leadership of Nicole Allen, have a textbook affordability initiative. So look for Student PIRGs, S-P-I-R-G-S, and Nicole Allen, Nicole with an E, A-L-L-E-N, and you will find that information.
Perfect, great. And yeah, I do agree. What happens a lot is you get this concept of free or accessible, and what you want to do is try to get rid of the incumbents, and figuring out ways that you could use the existing incumbents to actually help you succeed really does drive things along a lot easier. Cable, did you want to add to this, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. I just thought I'd check. So I think James is right on the money, and I just wanted to just clarify a couple things. One is, look, we need to go back to first principles when we're making decisions about textbooks, for example. And first principles of education are that we're educators, and our job is to create teaching and learning spaces where students can afford them, where students can access them, where they're actually accessible, not just financially, but technically as well. And this is where open textbooks and open educational resources work so well. So James, how much is tuition in California community colleges now?
It's a whopping $36 per unit. So if you're taking a political science class or a history class, a 3-unit class, it's $108. A textbook can easily be twice that. So of your total costs for a class, probably 2/3 could be a textbook.
So right. So I mean, look at this. You got a situation in California where textbooks cost more than tuition. That is absolutely unacceptable in a world where we know the affordances of digital things. We know that it costs nothing to store something that's digital, nothing to distribute it, and nothing to make 7 billion copies of it for every human being on the planet. If you missed it, we hit 7 billion, I think, today. And and we can use Creative Commons licensing to mark this stuff up, right? There's plenty of money. We'll get to sustainability later. And last point I wanted to make, again, the Open Course Library launched this morning. Some stats got thrown out by Nicole Allen, who was just referenced. If nobody other than the faculty members who built those first 42 Open Course Library courses, so if nobody adopts it, nobody else in the world, right, except for the few faculty who built these courses, next year's textbook savings will be $1.2 million, just from the faculty who built it, right? If all of our faculty just in Washington State adopted these courses, because these courses have a cap of $30 on the textbook cost, the savings would be $41 million a year, every year. If James, just a few of his faculty, adopt some Open Course Library courses or use open textbooks, the savings get even bigger. So the potential, I mean, just to cap James's point here, the potential to improve access to education for so many more people is right in front of us, and all we have to do is reach out and grab it.
We better move forward because we have lots more to talk about.
I was thinking it might be that time. Thank you, Steve. So Paul, yeah, well, you know, it's great. But question number 2, okay, and by the way, the later questions go a lot quicker. But how are OER projects sustained? And Paul, maybe you could start this off for us.
Okay, well, yeah, I thought I'd throw up this slide, which talks about the common attributes of OER. And really, in some ways, these are common attributes of not only open educational resources, but some of the other things that we're hearing talked about this morning, too. Open textbooks, even open source software, open access journals, all of those kinds of open initiatives share a set of attributes. So they tend to be free, they tend to be open licensed through Creative Commons in the case of OER, where access is explicitly expressed up front. Open things tend to be easily and quickly adapted, and you can form a community around those to generate customizations and enhancements to improve and correct errors. And so there's this whole reliance around continuing these things and making them sustainable through sharing. That really comes down to the kind of first principle that Cable was referring to. We're talking about sharing resources, sharing development, sharing hosting and support. And really interestingly, from my point of view, users become developers of these things. And we tend to think about OER as being educational resources developed by faculty. But in my view, there are also enormous opportunities to look at students as developers, or at least co-developers of OER. So I think a lot of these kind of what I call attributes of open are what are driving or providing the model for sustainability. Yeah, there's some examples here. So, you know, looking at the BC Campus Initiative, we've been getting annual funding each year from our ministry, 8 years running, total $9 million, and all of those funds have gone into the development of open curricula that becomes shareable across the system and beyond. We actually put them in a repository, and one of the exciting things that's happened to us recently is that we've partnered now with an international group in Colorado around science open educational resources that initially were developed in British Columbia and now are being co-developed and enhanced even further by partnerships with states in the U.S. We're also talking with our group that hasn't been mentioned yet, with our librarians, our electronic library network, about facilitating the formation of collections of OER that are deemed high quality and kind of authorized for use throughout a particular post-secondary institution. At the TAC level, we've talked about the money already, but interestingly, this is something Cable can talk about. The Gates Foundation has provided a whole set of support initiatives to further the TACT program grantees' ability to develop high-quality OER and sustain that going forward. Cable, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we already talked about how there's a CC BY license required on everything that's built with the TACT money, which is, again, proper public policy. But the big sort of the brick over the head moment for me and some others was that community colleges across the country weren't going to just be trying to get money, trying to get grant money to build something, but because of the CC BY license requirement, all community colleges in the U.S., and in fact any educational institution in the world, are potential consumers of all of that good work. And so it dawned on Creative Commons and Carnegie Mellon and State Board and CAST, our partners, our accessibility partners, that we should collectively do everything we can possibly do to help these TACT grantees be as successful as they can possibly be. Why? So they produce the very best stuff that they can possibly produce, because all of us are potential consumers. Now, of course, what they put out is going to be version 1, but Paul Stacey might take it in BC Campus and say, gosh, look at this green technologies program that was created. This is something that I can build upon and enhance and in fact, share back with my colleagues who built it. So we've put together this group. We're calling it the Open Consortium. It's the Open Professional Education Network, but essentially it's a set of professional and technical services for all of the winning grantees of the DOL grant to make sure that they can find other people's good OER, that they properly use the CC BY license so other people can find their stuff. Carnegie Mellon's going to be in there doing what they do great around instructional design and data feedback loops, CAST, making sure everything's accessible. The State Board will be in there sharing all their best practices they learned from the Open Course Library, assisting with professional development, policy issues, et cetera.
And I would add to that under the rubric of maintenance or sustainability, the cost or effort involved in creating the initial content is nowhere is much greater than producing an update to version 2, version 3, version 4 if it's been designed with the highest quality standards in mind. So all of these iterations point towards sustainability.
Hey, Paul, let me go to the next slide and have you start talking about that one.
Sure. So the next slide is around the view that JISC has, the UK OER initiative around sustainability. And if you want to flash that up. Theirs has been an interesting project in that the funding that JISC has been putting into OER in the UK has been supporting not only release and publishing of OER, but examination of what are the cultural practices around this? How can we better support this? Who needs to be involved in order to make this sustainable? And you can see some of the extending OER through collaborations beyond higher education elements on the right that I think point to themes that are important from a sustainability point of view. They're looking to see partnerships between the higher education sector and the private sector, and beyond just higher education, but within the public sector more broadly. This is actually something that we've been focused on in British Columbia as well, as looking at partnerships between higher education institutions and, say, not-for-profit associations, health authorities, First Nation tribal groups, etc., to leverage the OER across as many possible use cases right away up front. And then you can see in B that from a publishing point of view, they're looking to not exclude commercial publishers, but look to commercial publishers to think about the traditional publishing model and how it needs to change in light of OER. So what is the role of a commercial publisher within an open educational resource context? And I think there is a role there for them. And I'll let you just scan through some of the rest rather than talking to each specific one. But I do really like this last one down at the bottom around student experience and drawing on student-produced materials. I think this is a part of what's exciting about the future of OER is that we're really talking about not just faculty and teacher-produced OER, but what about the potential for students themselves to be seen as educational resource and content producers? And what if their contributions receive credit and are counted for as part of their mark, if you will, in terms of them successfully completing their education?
Yeah, this is really a great slide. We could probably spend an hour just talking about this, and I love it. But let's move to the next one. And Paul, thank you for that contribution. And James, was this? I think this was yours, right? This is one you talked about.
Yeah. Again, here's sort of a local example of utilizing publicly available funding to increase or expand our OER project. I talked a little bit about how we had initial support from the top, how we gained buy-in throughout the campus for the concept of OER in open practice. We still faced initially we still faced the challenge of incentivizing faculty, either to produce content or to adopt content. Again, as I said before, it's not to tweak version 2 or version 3 is not quite as tall an order as producing content from scratch. However, you're still asking the instructors who are very busy with everything else to rethink the way they do things. So we were able to receive a FIPSE grant, a Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education from the U.S. Department of Education, to help our faculty produce what we call playlists, a series of discrete OER objects, linking them together to create a unified voice for those objects rather than producing a complete open textbook. We were able to use that funding to fund some part-time production staff and provide stipends to faculty, so that we've been able to increase the number of objects in our repository from 0 to over 300 in a couple of years. But I'd like to make two points about this, though. One is that the initial funding, or the actual RFP for this grant, was focused on textbook affordability. And the grant funded a whole bunch of textbook rental programs. We were able to frame our project within the whole notion of textbook affordability. So I'd say to those folks out there who are thinking about, where could I find funding to do something on my campus, there are certainly, as everybody else has pointed out, there certainly are funding opportunities out there for OER projects. However, there are also there's also funding out there for projects related to college access broadly, textbook affordability, redesigning the curriculum, and so on and so forth. So think broadly about what you want to do with your project. It might really be a classroom redesign project that involves OER, and you can reframe it to make yourself more competitive for that funding. Secondly, I'd like to say that once we were able to get some traction with incentivizing faculty and get some local kudos and pats on the back and prominent space in campus presentations and so on for the faculty who adopted and created content, we found that other faculty are coming on board. So other faculty are using the content that they're finding in college open textbooks. We've also, I have to say, we're very pleased that a couple of our faculty have received a scholarship from college open textbooks. But we've got more faculty just stepping up to the plate, because this is the proper practice for educators, as Cable was talking about. Also, I'd say that partnerships are essential, as everybody's been talking about. There are a lot of other folks out there in higher education who are interested in the same kinds of projects. And up here, we see three organizations that are more focused on community colleges than perhaps some of the other organizations that have been mentioned. There's OpenCourseWare Consortium, of course, which is a real leader globally in promoting OpenCourseWare and is tightly connected to the MIT OpenCourseWare project. Then there's the Community College Consortium for Open Educational Resources and College Open Textbooks, both of which come out of the work that Dr. Cantor did and Judy Baker did up at Foothill de Anza, and those are both really focused on the work of community colleges. So I encourage you to take a look at those, and encourage you to stick around for the chat that College Open Textbooks is organizing after this webinar.
Wow, what a great partner. Thank you for the intros and the support. We appreciate it. Hey, so now we have a very interesting piece, and basically, anytime you see a black slide that says one person's going to do one thing, it's bound to be interesting. So, Cable, you're on. Let's have fun.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that this question of sustainability is absolutely critical, and what I tend to focus on is the proper framing of the discussion. So here's what I mean by that. We talked a little bit about open policies, right? The basic idea that when public funds are used to produce something, that whatever's built should either go directly into the public domain or should have a Creative Commons license on it, so that the people that paid for it have free and unfettered access, right? So that's an open policy. And the sustainability link is that if we get that simple idea right, that simple policy in place in the world's governments, in educational institutions, in states and provinces, then OER sustainability really ceases to become an issue, because A, there will be plenty of public funding to build and maintain all of the teaching, learning, and research resources that the world needs, and B, more to the point, open becomes the default and closed becomes the exception. And if we're smart, we will set the bar for receiving an exception very high. So if you're going to take public money and you want to lock something up, you're going to have to really give a good argument for why that should be the case. So the frame that most of us use today, I argue, is wrong. So we ask questions like, how do we sustain that pilot OER project over there that's something new, that's not really core to what we do? I argue that the right frame is to ask instead, maximize the investments that we're already making and, frankly, have already made on learning resources that we need for students, for our university, for our college, for our state, our province, for our nation, right? And all countries should be asking this question. So if OER simply becomes the default output of our normal work, then as Paul said, no new money is required. It's simply part of the normal business. And so then sustainability of OER simply becomes sustaining the academy. It becomes sustaining our learning environments. So this was really our sustainability policy when I was, my last job, I was the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And when we launched this open course library thing, we said, look, our sustainability plan is very simple. We're going to be selfish. We're only going to build and maintain what we would have done for Washington students, for Washington citizens anyway. So there's no sustainability needed there, right? It's our core budget, building our core curriculum for Washington citizens, which are taxpayers. So like that's very easy to argue in any kind of budget discussion. We then said, by the way, we're going to put a Creative Commons attribution license on everything that we build because A, we believe education is about sharing. B, this stuff is commodity content anyway, and it's not that's not, it's James taking it, using it in California. James isn't going to suck our Washington students away, so we're not worried about that. And if he can use it, great. And C, good things are going to happen to us when we share. Other people are going to update the curriculum. We're going to get new partners, new grant partners, for example, new grant opportunities. Other countries have already stepped up and said, hey, thanks for sharing your curriculum. Do you mind if we translate it into a different language? And we always say, gosh, you didn't even have to ask because it had a CC BY license on it. But yeah, knock yourself out. And by the way, would you be willing to share your translation back? And the answer, as you can imagine, has been yes. So yes, we're still going to need ongoing investments to maintain high quality OER. But if we collectively, and when I say collectively, I'm talking globally here, if we collectively have about the same highest enrolled courses, which frankly we do. James and I have run the data. Everybody in the world teaches Sociology 101 and Biology 101 and Psychology 101. Right? We could go through the top 100 highest enrolled courses. Doesn't matter what country you're in, everybody teaches about the same thing in their gen ed. And so if we have that collective need for quality, affordable learning resources that are iteratively improved based on data and assessments, shouldn't we do two things? One, demand that we get access to what we, the taxpayers, paid for, so we're not starting from scratch and we're not paying for things twice. And second, and then I'll be quiet, second, that we share what we build because we have a collective goal of educating more people to higher levels. No politician on any, I don't care where they are in the world or what level of politician they are, they're all going to want affordable, or they're going to want efficient use of the public funds that they allocate, and they're going to want their citizens to be more educated because it's going to be better for society, and frankly, it's going to be better for their economies as well. And so I think the big question is, and this is what my friend David Wiley likes to ask, is for those of us who are in education, or those of us that are in policy positions, we need to be very frank and ask ourselves, are we educators or not? And as David likes to say, if we're not sharing, we're not teaching.
Cable, thank you. That was awesome. But what's missing on this slide is we actually needed a pumpkin and you standing on top of it. So.
Hey, Mitchell, let me jump in with one more thing about this before we move on.
Please.
And I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say something about this sustainability question or issue to kind of, like Cable's talking about it at a really high level, but if we bring it down to the level of faculty, the people who are creating these open educational resources, one of the things that I see happening, just starting to happen, that I think will really sustain the future of OER, if you will, is the formation of collective discipline panel faculty members from multiple institutions who are coordinating and collaborating on the enhancement or development of open educational resources. This kind of is a transition from traditional culture, which has largely been a solo development effort by faculty, to a more collaborative and partnership development where it might be faculty from from multiple states or multiple countries who are collectively working on an open educational resource piece, which actually I think has tremendous potential for the maximal quality of that and for ensuring that it can be localized.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Hey, so let's move on to the next question, and Paul, this is something that you could probably help us grab a little time by running quickly. But where are these funding resources?
Oh yeah, I'll do this really fast. So both James and I, our respective OER initiatives, are using, as James pointed out, a piece of software called eKela as a repository. So at BC Campus, all of the many resources that have been funded through our initiative are put into what we call SOLAR, the Shareable Online Learning Resources Repository, and people can go there. There's the URL, and you can actually search by field of study or by the institution that developed it, and that kind of approach. I think that as we look at most OER initiatives, that's the approach that they're taking. The JISC initiative is exactly the same. They're storing their OER inside a repository called Jorum, where you can find, share, and discuss those resources. The TAC program is a little bit different yet in that it's not yet specified a central place where all the TAC resources will go, and maybe the Department of Labor will identify that and develop one, or maybe those who receive grants will simply be responsible for making those resources openly available through whatever means they deem appropriate.
This is Steve. If I could jump in for a second. Both of you talked about eKela or eKela. That may be based upon how you phrase the English language, but using federated search, and that is an important conversation in terms of sharing and being able to share, because from a variety of places like Merlot, you can get their content because it's federated search enabled as well. So that is a piece that I think will help as you go along, and SoftChalk is creating relationships with a lot of these federated search engines so you can find their content from within SoftChalk as well.
Great.
Yeah, and I think that we got, we have referatories like Merlot, which really doesn't house any content, and then we have repositories like James and I are using where the content is actually housed. It's like a database, really, where the content can be previewed and then, if you like it, downloaded.
Exactly.
Perfect. Thanks. Hey, let's move on to the next one, and this is an interesting question. And Cable, what do you see as some of the threats to OER?
Well, maybe you can move to let's go to one of the big threats that's out there right now. Just move forward in the slides. Yeah, there it is. So let's see, how do I say this politely? There are existing business models that are based on gatekeeping and locking up information, digital information, for good reasons. Their business models are based on it. And they're challenged now in a world where you can share digital things at no cost globally to come up with models that work. And I feel for them, and I understand that challenge. But those same businesses are fighting this positive open policy that we've been talking about. And this is the latest iteration of that fight. And essentially what has happened is there's been language that's been inserted into the U.S. House of Representatives omnibus budget bill. It's not yet in the Senate, but essentially, you can read it, but it essentially says you may not take Department of Labor money and build anything. It doesn't say anything about open license. It just says you can't build anything, period, until the Secretary of Labor has certified that there is no commercial option out there or no commercial option under development. So let's spell this out. I mean, this is about as nuts as it gets. Let's say, for example, that James at College of the Canyons has really hit pay dirt on helping people get through developmental math. James is seeing 30% higher completion rates than anybody else in the country on dev math, and we all know that's a big stumbling block for students. James really wants to apply for a grant to the Department of Labor to scale his project. He wants to build some new open developmental math textbooks. He wants to, and forget the open license, James just wants to build out his curriculum. The answer to James under this law, should it pass, would be, I'm sorry, James, you're not allowed to take any government or DOL money to build anything until you've checked with Pearson and McGraw-Hill and Cengage and Wiley and others, and any other publisher for that matter, to make sure that they don't have any developmental math that you can buy or any that's under development. So you can kind of see how crazy this is. But let's get to the crux of the issue here. This is not about duplicating publisher work. This is about we, the taxpayers, getting free and legal access to what we paid for. This is about our students, tax-paying citizens, having access to these materials, right? And so, and furthermore, nobody should be attacking the Department of Labor. DOL has put forth a simple, rational public policy that says taxpayer-funded educational resources should be open educational resources. And if the publishers want to debate, it'll be on this point. Now here's the kicker, right? If you look at the healthcare industry, you look at Merck and Pfizer and all these drug companies, they actually go to the U.S. Congress and other governments around the world, and they say, please use public funds to produce basic R&D for science. So they said, you know, they were very supportive of, say, the Human Genome Research Project that sequenced the human genome. Why? Because all that information's in the public domain, and Merck or Pfizer or whoever can come in and scoop it up and commercialize it, right? They can come in and build drugs but they've got to have that basic research. If the government hadn't done that, if the public hadn't paid for that, then they couldn't have gone to the next level. They would have had to do that original research, and it would have cost them billions of dollars. They don't want to do it. They know it's commodity, right? So here's the point. Publishers and industry trade associations who are concerned about the Department of Labor grant would do well to recognize that the CC BY license does not restrict commercialization of the open content produced by the DOL grantees. Let me be clear on this point. The commercial publishers can take all of the content created in this DOL grant, modify it, make it better, add value, sell it if they want to, and then the consumer, the states, the colleges, the students, we've got a choice. We can either use the free and openly licensed versions, or if there's added value sufficient to warrant cost, we'll purchase the commercial for a fee version. And that's fine, right? There's a choice there. But you know, releasing information created with public funds should be a public right, not viewed as a disadvantage to commercial interests. And how can they, through legislation, tell us taxpayers that we don't have access to what we paid for? I mean, that's just nuts. So I'll stop.
No, but it's a great comment, great information. Unfortunately, not so great things happening in the marketplace. But your idea, your suggestion was clearly answering question number 5, and that is, where does OER go from here? And you definitely gave a good suggestion on how commercial publishers can take advantage of the work that's already being done. James, Paul, do you have any comments, any thoughts on what do we do from here?
I'll just take a phrase from, I think, the Creative Commons world, and that is share and share alike. We don't need to rebuild we don't need to build everything from scratch. We've got great content out there. Let's share and share alike and continue to do so.
And I've got a 5-point series of steps for where we go from here, and here they are really fast. Number 1, I think governments, municipalities, and institutions can adopt open policy and guidelines around OER. And number 2, I think legacy resources that are held by governments or institutions or municipalities could be openly licensed and immediately made available. I think number 3, grant programs funding new educational resources should be required to have open licensing. Number 4, I think at the individual educator and student level, we could see them adopting open licensing as a standard way of doing things. And lastly, number 5, I think we can see collaborative consortia form around use and enhancement of OER globally.
Cable, did you, by the way, I just thought I'd highlight that I've been a talking head before, but I don't think I've ever been a talking pumpkin head before. Cable, you have any last-minute comments? And Steve, feel free to, as Cable's talking, to bring us over to the slide that you wanted to share at the end.
Well, I would just put a +1 on what Paul just said. I think he's got the list nailed. And Paul, I think it'd be great if you could share that list out. Maybe SoftChalk can present it with the archives. I think Paul's got all the right points. And if you want one document to read, I guess my parting shot would be go and read the Cape Town Declaration. It essentially says it's a bit more verbose than what Paul just was, but it goes through those same points. And it says we've got the tools to in fact help everybody on the planet get a high-quality, affordable education. And because those of us who understand how those tools can be wielded, in fact, we've got a moral and ethical responsibility to do so.
Hey, I was, you know what you may want to do, Paul? There have definitely been some chatter at the # OER series on Twitter. And why don't you put the 5, and we'll figure out where else we can put it, but why don't you put the 5 points there in a couple tweets. And Steve, let me pass the baton back to you, but I wanted to thank Paul, James, and Cable for the time they spent putting this together in the material. I think it was absolutely valuable. And gentlemen, thank you so much for making this happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, my thanks as well. This is the closing of this 4-part series, and it was very exciting. I just do, before everybody goes away, want to note and make sure everybody is aware, and I've said this before, that we have 3 webinars that deal with details about what OER resources are, how to find them, how to create them. So there are a variety of webinars out there. Just go to softchalk.com and the Learn More tab and go under Partners, and you'll see all those recordings. As it turns out, SoftChalk is having a webinar not specifically tied to this series, but a really logical follow-up. We have someone dealing with creating an OER for blended schools. They're a K-12 organization, and they are using SoftChalk Connect, which is our learning object repository, and they're making that an OER that can be shareable around the world. So that's something else that's coming up that will follow up conceptually with what we have done here. And there's several questions about wanting to put this information on various blogs and things, and I think, yes, you can. The other thing that I want to say is that there have been questions about the recording of this session. There's been questions about the slideshow that was used. You will get an email from Citrix Online tomorrow as a normal part of closing up this process, and in it will be links to the webinar that we are currently recording, and a link to where the PowerPoint that Mitchell was using to lead this conversation. So a lot of this information in the spirit of OER is available, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time today. We're a little over an hour, so unless there's last comments that someone would like to make, I'll pause for a moment to see who wants to chime in.
Well, I'll send in the link out to all attendees. We're going to have a chat at College Open Textbooks, just celebrating our 1,000th member, and also to answer any questions that you may have as a follow-through. And once again, Steve and SoftChalk, thanks for putting this together, and love the fact that we're able to get the caliber of Paul, Cable, and James to join us today.
Okay, that is exciting. It has been an exciting production. The first time we tried a kind of a free-for-all in this kind of communication mode, and it worked out really well. So thanks, everyone, and I will bid you all adieu. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Bye now.
Thank you.